Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back. This is episode 360. We've got a great episode this week. I have an interview with Brother Dago Rodriguez from the SoCal Research Lodge, the magazine, the Fraternal Review, and we're going to go through the top 10 esoteric authors as outlined in the magazine and as voted on by some Masonic scholars and the subscribers and members of the Southern California Research Lodge. The Whence Came You podcast is brought to you through the generous support of Masonic Revival, contemporary Masonic designs made for today's Freemason. You don't have to settle for throwing a plain old square and compass on anything anymore. Now you get something truly designed and truly wonderful. Whether it's aprons, awesome pins, and wonderful neckwear, bow ties, ties, pocket squares, you name it, Masonic Revival has it. Head on over to MasonicRevival.com and check out what they have to offer. And make sure if you see Brother Edgar, tell him thanks for helping bring this program to all of you. And this program is also brought to you by all of you, those of you who support this program. We can't do it without you and your donations and all of your assistance, so thank you so much. To find out more about how you can assist this program, head on over to wcypodcast.com and click on Support the Show. There you can make direct donations, sign up to be a monthly contributor, a fellow, or even a producer. And thanks very much to everybody for donating. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into this awesome interview with Brother Dago Rodriguez. All right, everybody, we're back this week. I have an extra special guest on the show, Brother Dago Rodriguez. If the name sounds familiar, that's because he is the managing editor of the Fraternal Review magazine, which is, of course, from the Southern California Research. So, Brother Dago, thanks for taking some time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
I know my listeners and listeners of Masonic podcasts across the world basically know you from the Fraternal Review magazine. We've seen you at Masonicon and Ezekiel Bates, and they've seen you around. The way you guys ran the table at Masonicon, it felt so amazing. It felt like I was back home and in Southern California going to Comic-Con. It was amazing.
Right? Isn't it? Well, that's what I thought it was going to be, right? Masonicon, Comic-Con, we need to play it up. It was our first physical trip to the East Coast, actually. So we really wanted to pull all the stops, if you will, and really create a booth that was going to be creative, fun, engaging, and inviting for everybody. And we were blessed that they allowed us to set up right in the center of the lodge room with 4 tables that we were able to bring enough stuff with us to show off the Fraternal Review publication, and it was pretty well received. We were happy with the people we met and the brothers that came up and spoke to us and partook in more Masonic life.
It really was awesome. Anybody who missed out, I took some pictures of the night, and it was great because we got to see the booth set up, and you had a whole year's worth of issues packaged, and they were like comic books. It was the coolest, but I digress. The reason we have you on, number one, thanks for having little blurbs about the show in the magazine here and there. I think that's just been the coolest thing. When a friend of mine, Fraternal, sent me a few Fraternal Review magazines in the mail, he said, check out page whatever, and I turned and I was like, oh my gosh, they mentioned the show. And it was the coolest thing. And since then, every time I get a chance to pick up an issue, of course, I'm all over it. The Fraternal Review magazine, I want to mention also right off the top that anybody out there who wants to subscribe can do that. We'll have the links in the show notes to make sure that everybody out there can get their hands on the Fraternal Review magazine. But let's talk about this issue, September 2018 issue, the top 10 esoteric authors. It seems as though you guys have really been on the forefront of exploring a little bit more of the deeper side, a little bit more of the philosophical side, or at least the thinker's side of Freemasonry on a Research Lodge side of things. Has it always been that way?
Believe it or not, they would actually write papers, members of the Southern California Research Lodge, and at first, they would pass them out, they would send them to the local lodges to share as Masonic. Later, they opened it up and started mailing Xerox pages of their writings or articles. It became the bigger thing. People were really interested in the condensed information that they were receiving that filtered through the Southern California Research Lodge. So then that became the mailer, if you will, of the Fraternal Review. And it was just a simple Xerox pages stapled together by the officers of the lodge. They would send out 11 issues a year, and that was how it started. And that's how they would promote Masonic education through the years. And not until what was like 3 years ago, we decided to rebrand the whole publication and make it a more thought-provoking, engaging, visual publication that we kind of haven't really seen out there before, to engage the younger Masons. And I don't really mean like younger in age, just new brothers that have joined the lodge that, we would ask, like, what are you interested in? What do you want to learn more about? And they wanted more of a concentrated issue, a theme, something that's more focused and not just different elements from different thought processes, just like what one theme can we focus on and expand on in this to create one whole piece of it. And I think that's where it's gotten more attention for that also. And we enjoy it. We enjoy the process of putting it together and coming up with the themes that we get to look into a little further and deeper, even if it's just a blurb that you can then go further and research through the accreditation that we give the authors. It at least gives you that seed, plants that seed that you can then expand on if you want to continue to further research it. If not, you at least got a brief overview of it.
Yeah, I got to say, the layout of the magazine is amazing also, and I was just kind of flipping through it the other day, and I happened to notice that you're not just the managing editor, but it looks like you do all the layout of the magazine as well.
Yes. I'm the main one that does the layouts, but we have a couple of other brothers that help out in putting the layouts together. And, I've been doing that since high school with a school paper, so it kind of came to me naturally to say, let's lay it out in such a way that we are publishing our own little magazine instead of those old school Xerox pages that we used to do. And yeah, it's just been fun. We're learning as we're going along as well, and I think that's what keeps the fire burning at the Southern California Research Lodge. Every time we get together, we learn something new, not just from the stuff that we're publishing in the issue, but just in the whole idea of the publishing and getting the word out there and getting more people interested and excited about Masonic education. Nobody gets paid to put this together. It's a small group of brother volunteers that put in the work. So
I'll tell you that it is most appreciated, the amount of work that you guys do put into this. It's a magazine that, while most Masons, we get these Grand Lodge magazines and that kind of thing, and typically those Grand Lodge magazines are just full of whatever, and there's a couple articles in there, and you get the Fraternal Review in the mail, and you're like, yeah, let me read this, and you put the Grand Lodge magazine to the side. I've only seen.
Thanks.
Yeah, I've only seen.
I sit in the board in the committee at the California Freemason magazine, and so it's funny because then we start talking about subjects that they want to cover in the California Freemason, which every Mason in the state gets. It's about 60,000 of them, and then when a topic comes up that sounds a little esoteric or fringy, they go, oh, well, that's why we have the Southern California Research Lodge. They could tackle that subject.
That's perfect. It's totally perfect.
And I'm like, sure, we'll do it. We'll take it on.
There's a few great Masonic magazines out there, right? And I've had the distinct pleasure and the honor of, I've written the California Mason magazine a few times, and I've said, hey, is it cool if I read this? And there's always been an overwhelming, like, yeah, go ahead. Just make sure, you link back and click on it. So that's always been really cool. So a shout out to the California Masonic magazine for that. With the esoteric authors, what got you guys on this particular topic? What made you say this is going to be this issue? I know you guys do themes. A really famous issue that came out not too long ago with Star Wars and Masonry, which was another fantastic issue. What got you guys to talk about esoterics, or why the topic of esoteric authors?
We did a poll on books, Masonic books, because we were being asked, like, well, what kind of books do you recommend? Are these the ones that I should be reading? So in September of 2016, we did a book poll, and it was a big generalized, whatever Masonic book you think we should be reading, to let us know, and we'll list the top. At the end of the day, it was like the top 25, but we really focused on the top 10. And we thought, we should really celebrate the authors that wrote these books and not just the topics that they wrote about. And a lot of the authors that we've been using in the Fraternal Review, parts of their writings, or have had them write original pieces for us, have been the ones that have delved deeper into the Masonic teachings. So this is why we called it the top 10 Masonic esoteric authors. Really, what is esoteric? But really looking deeper in that are getting our degrees, and then it's up to that brother to do a deeper look into the particular subject matter that you are studying, right? And I think a lot of brothers that join Masonry are searching for that, and this is why we decided to kind of celebrate the authors that focused on looking deeper into the craft. Because I think those are, to us right now, the most interesting books and authors that are kind of pushing the envelope and looking deeper into the Masonic roots, not just, there's a historical end of it, of course, but I think that the one that seems that we get more questions about are the esoteric. And that's where I think our readers gravitate more towards. So we said, well, let's see who the scholars that we know and the subscribers feel have been the most impactful esoteric authors out there. And that was the genesis of the poll, which we discussed over a year ago and slated it for this year. All the themes get decided on about a year before for the 11 issues. Debates and discussions that go into that room
I'm sure.
to finalize those 11 themes. And yeah, so you really have to come with your arguments lined up to say this is why this is important.
It's pretty interesting that you guys actually utilize a liberal art and science within the craft today, like rhetoric.
Yeah, well, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work for a little group, so you have to get everybody excited about it.
So I just want to kind of dive into this a little bit. The first thing I want to bring up is on page 6, you have the editor picks and poll results. But before I get into the poll results, I thought it would be interesting to go through your top 5. They broke out into classical and contemporary, right? So our older school and our newer school of thought. And so as I go through these names, if you want to just give me some interesting thoughts on the authors as we go through these were your picks. Under classical, I should say that none of the authors that were mentioned in the magazine I was surprised to see in here, right? These were amazing guys, for sure. But there were a couple on your list, on yours, that I hadn't heard of before. So, maybe you can enlighten me a little bit on some of these guys. So let's go with the classical first. So at number 5, Albert Pike. Now, that was interesting because he was also in the overall top 10. Why number 5 for you?
I read parts of Esoterica and was very drawn to it because he brought out the symbolism at that time and we're being told what it meant. So to me, Pike, he started to really push it to that standard that we're looking at it now back then. So it was one of those sort of romantic Masonic authors that you say, he rightfully should be on a top 10 list like he was in the final list, right? That high, I can argue yes and no, but I think that's where, after especially receiving my Scottish Rite and breaking down morals and dogma the way I tried to break it down, and then going back and watching the Scottish Rite degrees again, this time, in Guthrie being performed, all of them, taking such a deep appreciation into the time to this craft with so much heart and love. To me, it was just like a no-brainer. It was just like, of course, this brother has had enough of an effect that he's deserving to be on at least my top 5.
I'm going to say, okay, so then your number 4 was Albert G. Mackey. Your number 3 was somebody I hadn't heard of before, Harold W. Percival. What can you tell us about this guy?
Oh man, this guy. This was one of the very first books that when I became an officer, the senior deacon, right? And I was learning the middle chamber lecture. I always thought, there's that subtextual thing with this lecture that I know it has, and somebody needs to verify this for me. And I was at the Philosophical Research Society, which is Manly P. Hall's institute here in Los Angeles. And I ran across Percival's little book called Masonry and Its Symbols in the Light of Thinking and Destiny. And this little book completely not fully explained, but gave me enough reassurance that middle chamber lecture meant more than what we were just saying to the candidate. And it solidified the fact to me that there was a whole subtextual world underneath the teachings of Masonry as a young officer in the lodge, that I just fell in love with the book, and I read it cover to cover as soon as the thing with the Philosophical Research Society, you can't check out the books from the library. You could only reference them. So I was taking pictures of the book and finding it online and ordering my copy right away. And when I got it, I just tore into it. And I think he, to me, on that personal level, was the one that solidified the fact that that the subtext in Masonry is there. We just have to look for it. We just have to go in and discover it. And that's, I think, the fun of the Masonic journey is making those discoveries. That journey of that discovery of the symbolism that relates to yourself also, I think was what made me fall in love with the craft even more.
I can definitely feel for that. There's been books that I've picked up and started to just, kind of flip through, read a couple pages and go, I have to own this book. I have to buy this book. and then it totally like changes the way, and it becomes like your first real piece. Like that's how Milton Pottinger's Symbolism was for me.
And is that what it's called? Symbolism?
Yeah, it's one of those books like written in 1904. So the complete title is Symbolism, a Treatise of the Soul of Things. And then it's got one of these Rocky and Bullwinkle titles. It's like the main title, and then there's like a paragraph long title underneath.
Did you list it on your top 5? Because I know you submitted a list, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Yeah, he would have been one of mine. So your number 2, Eliphas Levi, or Eliphas Levi. What did he mean for you?
You could define magic in whatever way you want to define it. But to me, it was about capturing the imagination of Masonry. And whether you believe his writings or not, without a doubt, he definitely was the first to cast that spell, if you will, on you on how far-reaching Masonry can go. And he was definitely an influence to Albert Pike and also to like the Paul Foster Cases of the world, who later tarot and meditation also.
Yeah.
Those were little details that he was at the forefront of. I would love to study him more and learning, well, where were you getting all this information? I mean, there were his mentors also, but, where was the seeds to all this, the genesis to all this?
Right.
And I think that's what it was, that movie magic, if you will, of just like, okay, there's that special spell that this brother has cast on the craft that we should not shy away from. And I think a lot of people don't know enough about him, and I wanted to put him, my bias, higher up in the list so he could get more points, so he could hopefully make it onto the top 10.
Well, he certainly did.
Yeah, he did.
Let me ask, if you were going to recommend a book by Levi, what book?
The book that we Doctrine of Transcendental Magic.
Excellent. So your number 1 seems like no surprise, right? We were talking about, you talked about the Philosophical Research Society. He's one of my favorites. You had number 1, Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall for you, it seems like, you said you went right to the Philosophical Research Society. Had you known about this before you read about him, or what's your experience with Manly P. Hall?
Manly P. Hall is like when you really have a great, satisfying meal, right? It's like the first time I read him, I go, wow, like not only could he really articulate things in a very simple but complex way, but it was so clear. Anytime I give Manly P. Hall writing to even an entered apprentice, if you will, they will read it and immediately connect to it, because he just had such a talent for penmanship and the word and articulating thoughts so clearly, and to be able to connect them to Masonry in the way that he did. It was the first book I read, covered P. Hall's The Lost Keys.
The Lost Keys of Freemasonry.
And when I read it, I had to put it down because he goes into the other degrees, and I was just an apprentice. But I had, marked it to say, as soon as I get my degrees, I want to keep reading because I don't want to ruin it yet.
Yep.
And after I got them, I would go back and read those other chapters just to see his interpretation of the degrees. And when I later found out that he wasn't even a Mason when you wrote it, I was like, how?
Yeah.
What kind of gift does a man have to be able to articulate these teachings or experiences, right? All these experiences, because by then he was well-traveled. He had written The Secret Teachings of All Ages in his early 20s.
Yep.
And to have this worldly knowledge on being able to connect all these things, especially to our craft, I was just dumbfounded. And I still am. I'm still, I wish I would have been alive when he was alive to just meet him and get that presence of mind that he had. But he definitely is probably one of the most effective Masonic authors that I love to read over and over again. And if I had more time, I would read more of him. Because,
Yeah.
Pike is writing Truth also, the Masonic Truth, but he's a little harder to digest.
Oh, yeah.
Manly P. Hall
Yeah.
is just smooth. And you read it and you're like, okay. You
Yep.
can think, stop and reflect on what you just read.
There's a real
it starts
difference
happening.
there. And I think there's 3 things that happen within Masonic esoteric works. Primarily, you have your Albert Pikes, who speak eloquently, and it's truth, and it's all good, just like you say, but it is very hard to digest, and one would almost need to sit there like they're listening to, I don't know if you remember Dennis Miller's sketches, where he would go on a rant, the Dennis Miller rant, right? You'd have to have a thesaurus to get through it.
Yeah.
And this is kind of pike. And so many guys, myself included, thank brothers like Art de Hoyos for putting his commentary in there or the annotated edition. It helps break that down. And then we have guys like Manly P. Hall who were able to put this information out there and speak to it in a way that is absorbable and you get it. And then there's the third kind, which is really frustrating and by comparison is what makes Manly P. Hall's work so great. We have this other thing that I talk, sometimes I'll call it Twilight speak, right? Where you have a book and it's 300 pages and you'll read 16 pages and you're looking for what was even said within those 16 pages. You said something, you put a bunch of fancy words together and you referenced obscure ideas, but you never made a statement.
Yeah.
And so that's really frustrating. And those authors out there who they're really great writers, but to me, it's like, I feel, don't put a book out there expecting people to have to almost contact you or to figure out what you meant by something or to be puzzling, right? Like, if the goal of Masonry is to change humanity, then be the Gutenberg press, if you will. Make the information accessible to the common people. You're not going to get through to people if they can't understand what they're talking about. And Hall had that great gift for sure.
Yeah, but without even he was basically just guessing. Without being a Mason, he was guessing. That's the brilliance of it, I guess. The gift of it.
Yeah, and it certainly was a gift. I was at the House of the Temple. I get to get out there every year, every 2 years or so, and I always make a point to stop at the House of the Temple, right? And then Larissa Watkins is there, and the one day she pulled out the university edition of Secret Teachings, right? She's got it there, and it's one of the first printings, and she's let me thumb through it, and I'm checking this thing out, and it's beautiful. And I said, "This is such a great text," and she says, "He was a baby when he wrote this." Just a baby.
Isn't she awesome?
She is the coolest.
She's awesome. Have her pull that book out next time I go out there.
Yeah.
Coolest and yeah.
She's so awesome, and it's like I almost want to ask her, like, what do you know that you're not telling us? Let's go through your contemporary authors. Now, these are guys that are newer, all living guys. So you're number 5, John R. Heisner.
He was our Grand Master 2 years ago. He has some really fascinating talks on the symbolism of Masonry. And he's also written a book called In Search of the Grandmaster Hiram, and another book called Meditations on Masonic Symbolism. And he very craft-like breaks down the symbolism that's very digestible to especially a new Mason. And this is a contemporary guy. And they all kind of look the same, these covers. I'm like, why didn't you get more creative with the covers? He's like, because I wanted to have them be consistent.
So your number 4 is Greg B. Stewart.
Brother Stewart, he's from out here in Los Angeles. And have you seen his tracing boards?
I don't think so.
He's the one that has those cool graphic Photoshop tracing boards. I think we used one in the cover of the tracing board issue in 2016. And so he comes from that very surreal sort of mindset. And he's such a cool person to read, because he's also written 3 degree companion books. One called The Enter Apprentice, The Fellowcraft, and The Master Mason, and he for sure goes into this very esoteric-esque exploration of the degrees and its relation to Kabbalah.
Oh, nice.
So if you haven't read his, they're like about maybe 80 pages, each of these books. I highly recommend you explore them. We put them on the list of recommended reading to our candidate classes, our first degrees, second degrees. We give them a book list. We have our classes at my lodge at South Pasadena Masonic Lodge, and Greg's books are always on that list for them to chew on, and just to give them that extra, the perspective, a different perspective on Masonry. We tell them, you don't have to agree with all this, but you definitely should be aware of what's out there. Don't be an ignorant Mason.
For sure. Your number 3, Arturo de Hoyos.
He still won't meet me. No, I'm kidding. I don't show up early enough at the House of the Temple when I visit.
Yeah.
Larissa was like, noon he's gone. He's here at 4 a.m. He's gone.
Yeah, for sure.
Just based off his annotations, really, and how much care and attention he put into deciphering them and making it more articulate to digest with Albert Pike writings on that level. I think that he should be given credit for the work that he's put into this craft in conserving it, in conserving the Masonic teachings. I think you would applaud him a lot for being in the forefront of archiving all this and making us, what did we call him in the magazine? I think when he was on the top 10, the grand historian and archivist, and I think that those those individuals are the silent heroes on preserving our education and our history. And without it, we wouldn't have that perspective that he helps bring into Masonry, right?
Absolutely.
So I wish he was just publishing more.
I have to agree. Whenever he teases on Facebook, he's working on a new project, everybody starts foaming at the mouth. So,
I heard.
Exactly.
Heard what he's up to.
Your number one, we have Angel Millar. I've actually had the pleasure. I've had dinner with him once, and we met at MasonicCon 2 years in a row, and he came to speak at our 300 event out in D.C. Fantastic gentleman. What speaks to you there?
I think that spiritual nature and this very poetic presence, not only, did you not feel that when you were around him? Like the word poetic came to me for some reason, and also in his writing. And I think combined with that whole spiritual connection that he has with Masonry, made it more of the moment to me, of timely, of how the consciousness of Masonry is evolving right now. And I was able to read Freemasonry, which is one of his books that is out of print, of his, that really explored more of the exploration of the third degree, that I thought, wow, like, why is this out of print? This should be in every Mason's bookshelf. And that, the Crescent of the Compass as well. He also did a graphic novel with his wife that people don't know about. Yeah. We mention it in his little blurb, and if you can find it, check it. I mean, it's not Masonic, it's a post-apocalyptic story, but also it was kind of cool that he went from that to then these deeper connections and understanding of the Masonic works. And he actually will be doing a guest editor issue next year for the Fraternal Review. It should be, I can't say the title of it yet, but it'll be a fun piece that I think that we haven't seen explored yet, that he wants to discuss. And I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it.
Awesome.
Early in the year. It'll be out in the first quarter of the year, last I heard.
Very cool. Well, let's just dive into this top 10 that the magazine had. I mean, there were so many votes for these esoteric authors. Page 6 lists everybody who got votes, and incredible stuff. But the top 10, so our number 10 was Chuck Dunning for his the contemplative Mason work. Chuck has been around. I see whenever he's going to be somewhere. I've never had the pleasure of being at one of his lectures, but everybody raves about Chuck Dunning.
Yes. I was surprised that he made the list, but also happy that he made the list. I mean, he's only really published one book, right?
Yeah.
And to have that impact already off of one book says a lot of what he's accessing and pressing in Masonry. And that is that whole inner contemplation, because we talk about contemplation in Masonry, right? Contemplate on the symbolism, contemplating on yourself. But what does that mean? And I think he's been one of the first ones to kind of kick the beehive, if you will, and expand on that. Also through his Academy of Reflection, the meditation group that they started at Guthrie, Oklahoma. Have you been to it? Have you seen?
I have not.
Yes, I had the pleasure to sit through it, and he actually spoke at our lodge a couple of months ago, and it was probably one of the most enjoyable talks we had this year. And I think that he is somebody that we will be hearing a lot more of in the future.
Yeah, because he's got the one book and people love him, there's no way he's going to let it sit with one book. I hope not, Chuck. If you're listening, I hope you put out more books, man. It's been fantastic to see where he's gone so far.
Yeah. He's working on a second one. I know that for sure.
Really? Excellent. We have to get him on the show to talk about. Your number 9 in the magazine was Bob Davis, or Robert G. Davis, for the title of The Masonic Mentor. And the recommended reading is The Mason's Words. And I have to agree. The Mason's Words is actually, I can't really say who I worked with, but I worked with surveying for books because we needed to come up with a recommended reading list for a certain committee that I'm on. And I had to choose 3 books, a beginner book, an intermediary, and then a more esoteric text. And Bob Davis's book was my number 2, my intermediary book, because he blends this idea. He talks about the symbolism, but also where the ritual came from and the history there. It's a fantastic book.
It is. And well, because in a way, his personality, I think when we read a lot of these books, we really the ones that work, you start to get a sense of the author's personality and also part of their moral compass. And I think in reading the Mason's words and the other book, the Manhood book that he wrote, and also seeing him speak, I mean, it's just something so endearing and powerful at the same time with Brother Bob Davis that, I don't know, it makes you really, really proud, if you will, to be a Mason and have men like that represent the craft with such integrity, you know?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that has always resonated with me whenever I meet him, whenever I've seen him talk, that it's like, wow, like, you know, it's like I was at the Masonic Restoration Foundation and he was there speaking and I got to hang out with him a bit, and it's just, I mean, just being around him makes you feel special as a Mason. It's almost somebody that you want to live up to and become. Like you can't deny that when you're around him. Like, and a lot of us felt that way when we were there. I'm happy that he made the list.
Our number 8 was on your list, Angel Millar, the creative spirit, right, for the crescent and the compass.
I'm happy that he made it because he was on my list.
Yeah.
Was he on your list? I don't remember.
He wasn't on my list.
What more can you say about Angel? He's got more to say, and I think it's going to be really interesting in talking to him how he explores the craft even further. And he's still really young.
Yeah.
You know, he's got a lot of time, and again, he will be one of those that we're not going to stop hearing about. And he enjoys it and loves it so much that I think we'll see different topics and subjects that he's going to be exploring, all related to Masonry, that will give it a different take and angle.
Yeah, he does definitely take some different takes and angles, and I think what's great is he's not afraid to attach himself or take an angle that is somewhat controversial in terms of it's not exactly political, but at the same time he speaks to the underlying need of Masonic justice in terms of equality of peoples and justifications of things. You know, he's that...
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting, but is it justice or is it connection? That we shouldn't be fearful to connect with what we're not comfortable with, right? With what's different, because the craft is what it preaches in a way, right? Connecting and coming together with our differences and working in harmony. And you're right, he's fearless in broaching and diving into that subject matter, which makes him brave in a way.
Our number 7 was the modern day alchemist, Timothy Hogan.
Yeah, brother Tim Hogan. Yeah, I mean, is he not the modern day alchemist? I mean, he's on YouTube putting a lab together in his basement.
He is. He sure is.
It's awesome. It's, you know, another one that is fearless in diving into those realms that we don't think about in Masonry at the start, but the more we study it, the more we can see those connections, and he just goes forward with them. And he definitely inspires others, maybe not to explore the same things that he is exploring, but to definitely look at the craft openly and with a magnifying glass and subtextually. Anybody that can motivate us to do that, especially a new Mason that's just joined the fraternity, that's special. That's important.
The recommended book is The Elements of the Elements, which really connects. He's working essentially to connect different ideas that are common threads throughout a lot of different aspects of religions and fraternities, and I'll say quote-unquote secret societies. So people love the book.
Yes, and it's not that dense of a book that's accessible, a good read. It's not that, you know, over intellectual that you're going to read 2 pages and put it down and have to take a break. I think you could really digest it and make different connections to it. And I think that's why we ended up putting that book in there. He's got several little books like that dive deep into the consciousness of ourselves and connection with the duality of man, Masonry, Kabbalah, for sure. An esoteric author, without doubt.
Your number 6 was on your list also, Eliphas Levi, the Masonic magician, just as you described him. And this is the book that you recommended, the Doctrine of Transcendental Magic.
And just back to that idea that the magic of Masonry, looking at it from that surreal perspective and that imaginative perspective and making those connections is what I think makes him one of those special authors that should be noted.
I'll move on just to number 5 because we talked about him already, Brother Levi already. 5 was The Surveyor of Symbols and Psyche, which was Kirk McNulty. I didn't know who Kirk was until the 300th event where we had him out, and he was there signing copies of his books. And
how is he? I've never met him. How is he?
He is the coolest cat ever. So nice and so pleasant, and you can feel his genuineness when you shake his hand. Like, he is genuinely pleased to meet you and gave me a really nice signature in the book. But a fantastic author, and people rave about his work as well. And I have to agree, after reading the book that I bought, is wonderful.
Was it The Way of the Craftsman?
No, I actually have another one. The book I have of his is called just Freemasonry, A Journey Through Ritual and Symbol. And the book really goes through, it talks about the mysteries, Renaissance, some psychology. It has chapters on entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and masonry, master mason. And then it talks about early theories and origins. And it's also not a huge tome either. It's 100 pages or less, really.
But he is I'm almost seeing a parallel now between him and like Chuck Dunning in seeing the symbology as the inner work, the contemplation, the psyche, right, of the human condition in relation to masonry, and how he connects the symbology to the craft and to how one should live their life. And that's interesting. Because I have not read, honestly, a lot of McNulty. I think one of the books I went through, but I wasn't surprised to see him on the list.
Yeah,
a lot of people do talk about him and reference him a lot.
I was surprised because not that I didn't put him in that caliber, just that I had no idea that many people knew of his work. So it was pretty incredible. So number 4 is actually the book that I recommend as our deeper book. Like, if you're a Mason and you want a deeper book for this committee I'm working on, The Meaning of Masonry by W.L. Wilmshurst, coming in at number 4. He's another one who cuts kind of through the BS. And Meaning of Masonry is really set up in almost like lectures that he's compiled, but another fantastic book.
Calls it the noble science, Masonry.
Right, yeah.
Noble science. But he kind of reminds me a bit like the one I had on my list, Percival, in about really exploring it from almost that scientific level, but really connecting it through that spiritual level as well into the craft.
No doubt. Yeah, I can't say... Yeah. I don't want to say too much about the work, really, because I think it really is, in its simplest terms, it is connecting Masonry to, I'll call it a dogma, right? He talks about this, and you don't have to cut through too much of the BS, because there really isn't any. It gets right to the heart of the matter, which there are some other authors that do that too, but it's a rare trait. Your number 3 is the grand historian and archivist, Arturo de Hoyos. So, Art, congratulations.
Yes, Art, congratulations. I gotta get my Light on Masonry book. Recommend it. I put in a call already, so hopefully they'll send it over.
Number 2 was Manly P. Hall. Yeah, wasn't super surprised to see him at the top of the list. I thought, well deserved.
Yes, I almost thought he would be the number 1.
I would have expected it also. I didn't. I expected, I'll say this, I expected who the number 1 was to be on the list, just not number 1.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought too. Because it's just Hall's, as we discussed earlier, is just more accessible or easier to digest, which makes it easier for more people to read and connect to, right? So I thought, well, he would probably get the higher marks, but no, it wasn't enough.
So we kind of danced around it. Dago, who's our number 1? Who's the number 1 esoteric author according to the scholars voted on by the membership?
The number 1 esoteric author is voted by the membership and some Masonic scholars from the Fraternal Review is Brother Albert Pike.
Boom.
Brother Albert Pike.
You guys have his recommended reading as Esoterica, which I thought was fascinating. Because so Esoterica, for a lot of people that don't know, it really explores those first 3 degrees, but they're not exactly the degrees we experienced, because they're kind of based on those French rituals of the Scottish Rite 3 degrees. And so many people also, when I polled the people I had to poll for my organization, I just can't say anything about it yet because we haven't launched it.
Okay.
But that was a huge one too. Everybody was like Esoterica. And I couldn't recommend it because it doesn't speak to the degrees that are conferred in my jurisdiction.
Well, and also, Pike, you look at him as more of a Scottish Rite appended body sort of brother and not, a Blue Lodge Mason. All his writings are really more around the Scottish Rite and less about the Blue Lodge. So to see him still get that notability and respect, I found also really interesting. That it's that far-reaching and encompassing that even on what he writes on the Blue Lodge degrees has that much of an impact to consider him in a list like this.
I have to agree with you 100%. Before I get your final take on some things, on the back cover you have the final word by Mike Pohl, who has been the Masonic Author of the Year twice here in Illinois. We've picked his book twice for the Masonic Book of the Year. You guys have a quote on the back. Teaching by symbols had been in use since the dawn of mankind. Profound teachings could be presented by the use of symbols, and those uneducated in the meaning of the symbols would be able to see nothing of what was being taught. It not only was an effective way to teach, but it provided security. Freemasonry teaches by the use of symbols because its roots are in the very esoteric groups that used this method to teach. Esotericism is not a foreign subject to Freemasonry, but is as much a part of the fabric of Freemasonry as is initiation. And a great quote. I was having dinner with a brother who is not a very big on the esoterics. In fact, he had some choice words about esoteric work in Masonry. Not to say that it's all BS, but he kind of sounded like he said it was all BS. What do you feel about that? Do you see a divide?
Yeah, of course, I do. In the editor's word on the second page, I mentioned a situation where I had a brother blatantly just say, that he joined Masonry. He didn't join Masonry for the education, and it's hard when you hear that in the 21st century that you want to join anything and not want to learn more about it and educate yourself, especially when they're offering you the opportunity to learn more through lectures, reading groups, and to have that mentality still sprout out in lodges makes it even more of a motivation to keep publishing the Fraternal Review and putting things like this out there to educate you on what the craft, how big the craft really is and how far-reaching it is. And to just crap on the idea of esotericism, I guess, in Masonry. I mean, it's really saying, I don't want to learn more. I don't think there's anything deeper. I just take it for face value and I'll walk away from it. But then what does that really leave you with?
I feel like Masonry's primary goal is to make good men better, right? That's what we say. So how do we do that? I mean, there's of course a deeper symbolic version of that, but
it's through the education.
Exactly.
It's through understanding what you just went through.
So,
and the minute you say you don't care for it, then why are you here?
Why are you here? Exactly.
Why are you here? Well, because I want to hang out. I want to make friends. Well, okay, that's part of it. That's the cornerstone for sure. But once after the 4th, 5th barbecue, what then?
Yeah.
How do you make that brain grow and understand something different? And, Pohl's quote, yeah, it's right on it. I was just going over the 2nd degree lecture, the part that the master gives. I don't know how other jurisdictions break that up, but at the end of it, there is this talk about why we use symbols that are most expressive in architecture to symbolize the deeper meanings and philosophies of the craft. And we talk about the 3 precious jewels of Masonry. And why? What is that? Why do we do that? I mean, just having that discussion alone is an esoteric discussion. And not every Mason understands that. And if they don't understand that, then they're already almost violating the oath that they've taken in Masonry, right? By keeping these secrets to yourself and not sharing them with others is basically what you're getting told at the end of that lecture. And with those 3 precious jewels. Right? And so that's where I find that really interesting and sad at the same time, where they are already closing themselves off when Masonry should be opening you up more. And I think we just have to do a better job in guarding the West Gate, right?
I completely agree with you. So I think it's a good place to wrap it. First of all, everybody out there, go to theresearchlodge.com, which is their official website. You can read past issues, pay the dues there, subscribe. They're on Instagram as well, and you guys are on Facebook. We'll have links to all of those in the show notes. And Dago, what an honor it was to have you on the show, man. This was the coolest.
No, man, the pleasure was all mine, and thank you for continuing with the show. You're almost going to hit, are you going to hit the 400th episode by the end of the year?
Well, it's quite possible. Maybe early 2019.
Well, that's a huge achievement, and you should be proud of yourself because your podcast was the first Masonic podcast I heard, and it helped inspire this rebranding of the magazine and this idea of we should have a pop culture section where we reference podcasts, which is a very happening thing now, and a video or a YouTube video and a book, and connect the dots with everything else that's out there in Masonry. And you should be proud of the work that you've put into it in continuing the educational side of Masonry, which is, in our opinion, really important. And we should all be supporting each other in that venture.
Well, I thank you very much for those kind words. It's a constant inspiration, so I guess we all feed each other, right? Because we look around Absolutely. And we see the great things everybody else is doing, and that's what keeps us going. So thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Had a lot of fun with Brother Dago. We could have talked for hours. It was so easy to talk to him. If you ever get a chance to bend his ear and hang out with that guy, please do. He's amazing. All right, now let's go right into this week's Masonic Minute with illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison.
Trying to piece together a concise biography of Voltaire, I could come up with nothing better than this entry in William Denslow's 10,000 Famous Freemasons. Voltaire gained fame as the defender of victims of religious intolerance and as a master of satire. This won him the condemnation of the established church, who labeled him an atheist and who still ban his books to this day. He was educated under the Jesuits and began writing at an early age. He was confined to the Bastille in 1717 to 1718, and again in 1726, but made good use of his time by writing. Banished to England, he wrote his observations on English social and political institutions, which caused such an uproar that he was forced to seek seclusion in Lorraine. In 1750, he accepted an invitation to visit Frederick the Great, a Freemason, at the Prussian court, where he produced his greatest historical work, The Age of Louis XIV. He quarreled with Frederick, left Prussia in 1753, and spent his last 20 years near Geneva. He was initiated into Freemasonry on April 7, 1778. Less than 2 months before his death. The event took place at Paris in the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. The ceremony was conducted by the celebrated French astronomer Joseph Lalande. Voltaire entered the lodge escorted by Benjamin Franklin, the American ambassador. It is recorded that the scene was one of unusual brilliance, owing to Voltaire's age, distinction, and disability. The usual preparations were dispensed with. Despite the charges of the established church, Voltaire was a deist rather than an atheist. At his own expense, he erected a church on his estate and dedicated it to God. One of his most quoted statements is, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." The fact that he became a Freemason is conclusive proof to all members of the craft that he believed in deity. He died May 30th, 1778, at the age of 83. It has been reported his last words were, "I die adoring God, loving my friends, not hating my enemies, and detesting superstition." However, that is actually something he wrote. There is a different account of his last words, or at least an incident, that occurred while he was on his deathbed. A priest visited Voltaire while he was dying and urged him to renounce Satan while he still could. Voltaire refused, replying, "My good man, this is no time to make enemies." For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.
All right, many thanks goes out to illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison for his tremendous and tireless work as it comes to the Masonic Minute segments. They're just amazing. We actually keep these as a separate YouTube video alongside of the show. So not only is it within the show, we keep it as a separate video as well. Feel free to go find those and add them to a playlist and play them at your next Masonic meeting, or maybe you have an open house. It'll help open it up for conversations and give a little bit more insight as to some of the things that go on in the craft, whether they're funny, outstanding, amazing, historical, or even just touching. I also want to just mention that Steve's new book is out right now, which is, of course, his first volume of his series on Ray Denslow. So you're going to want to check that out. Missouri Lodge of Research. We'll have links to that right there in the show notes. And once more, just a big shout out to illustrious Brother Harrison for his great works. Now comes the point in the show where I ask you to help support this show. How do we do that? Well, we have a bunch of different ways to do that today. If you head on over to wcypodcast.com, you can click on direct donation through PayPal, which we briefly touched on at the beginning of the program. Of course, you can make that one-time donation, or you can sign up to be a monthly contributor. Contributing $2 a month, $5, or even $10 a month, whatever you choose, really helps the program out. Of course, we have a limited edition shop where you can pick up any number of items that come direct from us. Help us out by going to MasonicRevival.com, but also we have some other affiliates that are really important. Banker's Best, one of the most unique things we've ever done, is to work with Brother Levi Banker out of St. Louis, who owns his own company called Banker's Best Beard and Skincare. He's been so generous. If you head to wcypodcast.com, click on More, then click on Banker's Best, and you can check out a bunch of the different products he's got. He's got a whole line of beard care products, skin care, oils, balms, all of this stuff, and he has been doing it a long time. He knows a lot about it. Everything is handmade, quality items. We even came up with the King Solomon's Reserve Beard Balm, which is a few years old now, but remains one of the great products that he still offers. Even the artwork on the bottle was done by a brother. The nice thing about this particular product is 50% of the proceeds come back to the program. If you're a history guy like me, then you'll be pleased to know that what makes the beard oil and balm very special is that it was made utilizing the fragrances specific to the exports of King Solomon's time and location, which is amazing. So black fig and honey is the formula. Luxurious scent, as Levi says, truly fit for our first Grand Master. If you use the promo code BBWCY357 at checkout, you'll also get a little bit of a percentage off. Please check that out. Banker's Best, or just head on over to buybankersbest.com. We also have a code with On It. You can go to our website, click on More, then go to On It, and you can click through any of the links here, or just go to onit.com and use the promo code WCY at checkout. You'll get 10% off, and they'll send a little bit back to the program to help us out. And of course, it's business time. The book that I wrote with John T. Ruark, it is making some real waves, and people are using it and seeing success. So check that out on Amazon. You can click right to it. You can get it on Audible, Kindle, or in print, even on iBooks. And last but not least, I want to ask you to check out the Great Books program. You'll see the banner for it on the left-hand side, Intellectual Linear Progression. Use the promo code WCY, or you can just click on that link there, and you'll actually go right to the website and hear a little bit from Scott Hambrick about how awesome the program is. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy, and thank you so much for helping us out. So in this particular episode, I wanted to mention that Brother Aaron Chauncey, who has covered a song in the past that we've used as a play-out, a song that I just love, he wrote a new song, and it was a tribute to a brother of Ezekiel Bates, who had recently passed away and who had been ill for some time. And I think Aaron did a great job writing and performing the song, so I thought perhaps it would be great to go ahead and use it as we play out this evening. So enjoy. So that's it for this week. I hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back next week with another great episode. And until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.
I can hear your call. The strangest part of all is I'm not frightened. Behind the darkest star, I know that's where you are. I hope I found you. I've been so restless for as long as I can tell, searching for a path to walk for me. I never asked for more than what was mine to take, but now I'll have to wait and see. There's just one more request from me. And see, I swear I saw your face. We're strangers out of pace for not much longer. Come to set me free. Acceptance is the key. I think I found it. I can see horizons behind shadows on the wall. These are the echoes within me. Friends and lovers dear departed, dance in silhouette. I'll not soon forget, you'll see. That's why they're waiting here for me. And see, as darkness closes in, just let it all begin, and I won't fight it. I can hear your call. My favorite part of all is I'm not frightened.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.